in today's lesson, we are going to start with factorization. So an overview of what we'll be doing is we're first just going to revise the common factor as we've done in grade 9. And then we're going to look at something new called grouping. Alright, so for the first example, a really simple example, if I have to take out the common factor of this, if the question says factorize the following, then I take out a common factor. Now if I have to look at two things, I have to look at my coefficients and I have to look at my variables. So from my coefficients we see 2 and 4, and then to get the highest factor that you've learned in grade 7, how to get the highest common factor, and from 2 and 4 that is 2, so we take out 2, and then from x and y, and here we have, in this term we have x. So in each term, this is the first term, this is the second term, in each term you have to take out what is common in both terms. So we can see there's an x over there and there's an x over there. So we take out an x as well. So everything we want to take out, we just write down. Then we open the bracket, and then from the first term, we see we took out 2x. So what is left is y is left. And then from the second term, we took out 2x, which means if I take out 2, I just divide 4 by 2, or with whatever I take out. So 4 divided by 2 is then 2. So we say plus 2 and the x we took out. And then we close our bracket. Alright, and this is then your final answer. And to check yourself whether you've done it correctly, you can just say, if I multiply this in, like we've been doing product, if I multiply this back into these brackets, would it give me the same answer again? Okay, so for example 1b, here we have 3 terms. Now let's start with our coefficients. We've got 3, 9 and 12. So the highest common factor between 3, 9 and 12 is 3. So I write that down. And then in each term, I see there's an a. There's a squared. So a squared is the same as saying it's a times by a. So that's just two a's written next to each other. So, but I can't take out both because this term over here can only give me 1. So I must take out something that everybody can give me. So I can only take out 1a. Now that is, then I can also see there's a b over here, but I can't take out a b because these two terms don't have a b. So that is the highest common factor we can take out. And then if I take out 3a, from here, if I take out one of these a's, I'm still left with another a. So then I'm just left with a because the 3 is also taken out. Then minus, now 9 divided by 3 is 3 and the a we took out. And then plus 12 divided by 3 is 4, the a we took out, and the b is still there. Okay, and that is then our answer for that one. Then for example 1c, here we have a bunch of variables. There's only one coefficient here, so we can actually only take out a, b's and c's, because that actually comes, we can see that in each term. Now we need to decide how much of each we're going to take out. We can see if we start with a, this one is a squared, that one's a, that's a to the power 3. So at most I can only take out 1 because the middle term can only give me 1a, so I can only take out 1a. And then for b, we see we've got b to the power 3, b squared and b squared. So I can actually take out b squared because all 3 of them can give me b squared. And then finally we have c, so c squared, and c to the power 4, so at most I can take out c squared. Then I open my bracket, and now what do I have left? If I take out 1a here, then there's still an a left. If I take out 2 b's here, we've still got b left, and then the c squared is taken out completely. Then we have minus, the a is gone, the b squared is gone, and the c squared is gone. Now if I take out this entire term, it's not just equal to 0. You can't just not write it. You have to put a placeholder because that's a term on its own. So you have to put a placeholder 1. And then plus, now remember, if we put the placeholder 1, when we multiply this back in to get the same answer again, this will then be multiplied by 1, which would then give you the same answer here. Alright, and then here we have a 2. We took out 1a, meaning we still have 2 a's left, or a squared left. B squared is gone, and then c to the power 4, if I take away 2 c's, then I've still got c squared left, and then that is our answer there. Okay, now this one is a special case where we can identify. Now in these cases, it's important to identify your terms. This is a term on its own. That's one term. That's two terms, and that's three terms. All right. So each of these are terms. Now in each of these terms, we need to see what is common. What do we see in each term? And we can see that a plus b is. We can see that coming up in each term. So I'm going to take a minus b. I'm going to take out a minus b as a common factor, but we still have to put it in its brackets. It needs to stay in its brackets. So a minus b comes out. All right. Then we open our bracket for what is left. So once I've taken, if I remove a minus b from this first term, this is left, the 2p. So I write down 2p. Then if we move on to the next term, we say minus. And then if I remove a minus b, then I'm left with minus 2q. And here if I remove a minus b, I'm left with plus 3r. And that is then our answer there. And similarly in this example, we have only two terms here, but we have a factor here, x minus y minus z, that is that comes up in both of them. So I'm going to first just take that out, and also I can actually also see that with the coefficients, if we look at this term and this term, if we look at the coefficients, there's a 2 there and there's a 4 there, so we can actually also take out a 2. So we take out a 2, and we also take out x minus y minus z. So this is what we took out. All right, so you write down what you take out, and then you open your bracket, and then you write down what is left. So if I take out a 2 and I took out a minus x minus y minus z, then what's left is a squared, and in this term there's still a negative. And then if I take out 2, it's the same as saying 4 divided by 2, so we're left with 2. B is not taken out, it's still there, but we did take out x minus y minus z, so we just left with 2b for this final term. And that is then our answer. So this part represents what we took out, and this part represents what is left inside the bracket. Okay, for 2c, here we have again two terms, all right? But if we look at what's inside the brackets, we've got p minus 2q and 2q minus p. So they aren't, this isn't the same value. So we can't take out p minus 2q because this is 2q minus p. But if we look closer, we can see that if we swap these two around, if I have p minus 2q, now let's start with something like a plus b, right? I can swap it around, and then it just becomes b plus a. The only complication with this one is that we've got a negative, and when we say a minus b, it does not equal to b minus a. So I can't just swap these two around with a negative. What I do is I will just copy this again. We are going to swap it around, but I'll show you now what's going to happen. If you do swap it around and there's a negative, you have to change the sign in front of that term. So this then becomes negative 2b, and then you have p minus 2q. All right, and why that is let's say I have a minus b, all right, and I want to swap these two around. So when I swap them around, remember the sign in front of the term belongs to that term. So when I swap them around, I have to write it as minus b plus a, because that's positive a and that's a negative b. And now if I take out a negative here, then we have to take out a negative from each term, then we're left with b. So this becomes a plus, and if I take out a negative, the sign just changes, and this becomes a minus. Okay, so what happened is if we want to swap these two around, the sign in front of the bracket just changed. That's just a easy way to do it, so that you don't have to go through all of the steps every time, especially with these longer sums. Okay, so that means then that we have, for this one, that is why we could swap it around and then change the sign in front of the term. Okay, and now we actually have p minus 2q that's common for both of these terms. So I take that out, I write p minus 2q, and then open my bracket. So what's left in the first term is 3a, and then what's left here is minus 2b. Okay, so that was the examples for common factor. Now let's move on to grouping. Now with grouping, in factorization, you always first look for a common factor like we just saw. But if you can't find a common factor, if we look at this, is AC minus AD plus BC minus BD, then the next thing we ask ourselves is how many terms there are. Now, in this case, we've got 4 terms. So if you have 2 terms, it could either be difference of squares or sum difference of cubes, and we're going to get to those. We did some difference of squares last year. And then if it's 3 terms, if you remember the trinomials, and then if it's 4 terms, it's grouping. So grouping, the method we do it, if we look closer, we can see that in the first 2 terms, there's a common factor of A. And then in the next 2 terms, there's a common factor of B. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out the common factor from the first 2 terms. So now we're ignoring the second 2 terms. We just take it out from the first 2 terms. So if I take out A, I'm left with C minus D. All right? And then if I take out the common factor for the next 2 terms, I take out, and this is important to put your sign, plus B. So I take out positive B, and then what is left is C minus D. If I take out B here, we've got C left. If I take out B here, we've got D left. Now we can see that we have something like the previous examples where we've got 2 terms where these brackets have the same values. And with the grouping, you always have to have these brackets have to end up identical. Otherwise, you know you did something, either you did something wrong, or you're going to have to rearrange the terms at the top. So we now take out C minus D as our common factor, and then we are left with A plus B. And then this is our final answer. Okay, so now we have this one. Now, first of all, look for common factor, and if we see there is no common factor, like a number that's that we can see in that is in each term. Now, if there's no common factor, we ask ourselves how many terms there are, and since it's 4 terms, we might consider, or that it would be grouping. So if we do grouping, we first look at the first 2 terms, okay? And then what is common from this term and this term? I can see that there's an x on both. So if I take out an x and open my bracket, I'm left with this 2p minus, and then if I take this x out, I'm just left with 1. Okay. And then over here, I've got minus 4p plus 2. Now, if this, so we're now focusing on these next 2 terms, and if the first term is a negative, always take out the negative as well. So if I take out a negative, and what's common is 2 can come out. So if I take out 2, negative 2, and I open my bracket, remember this now was a negative term. Because we took out a negative, it becomes positive. And 4 divided by 2 is 2p. And then when it's a positive term, if I take out a negative, it becomes a negative. And we took out 2, so we're just left with 1. Alright, so now we can see that the first term contains 2p minus 1 and the second term contains 2p minus 1. So I'm going to take out 2p minus 1, and then I'm left with x minus 2. Then for example 3c, again in this case we've got a term here, one term, and there's another term. Now there's nothing, there's not a, like there's an A, but there's not an A there. There's a B, but there's not a B there. So in this case, once again, we don't have a common factor, but this has 3 terms. So, and this is definitely not a trinomial, which we're going to revise in the next lesson. So what we can do is first multiply out all your brackets. So let's see what we have if we do that. Is a squared plus 3a plus ab. Plus 3b. Okay, so now we are left with this. And once again, so let's now, since we have 4 terms, let's try and factorize out the common factors. So we have a coming out for the first 2 terms. So we have a plus 3 there. And then in the next 2 terms, we have a b that's common. So we factor out plus b, and we're left with a plus 3. And here we see that this term has a plus 3 and this term contains a plus 3, so we take that out. And then we're left with a plus b. Okay, and then for example 4. Alright, so this one is quite long. Here we have actually 6 terms. Now this one is a bit more of a problem solving question. Now if we look at the first 3 terms, we can clearly see there's a x squared that's in each of these first 3 terms. And also this one has factors of 3, 6, 9 and 3. So let's apply the grouping, but now just with 3 terms. So from this first 3 terms, we take out x squared. Okay, so what's left is 2p minus 3q plus 1. Okay, and then here we see our first term is a negative. So let's take out a negative, and also we see these are all multiples of 3, so we take out a 3. Then I open my bracket, so 6 divided by 3 is 2p. Then 9 divided by, now remember we took out a negative, so that means you take out, whenever you take out a negative, you change the sign for what's left. So this plus becomes a negative. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and then the q is still there, and this becomes a positive, and then 3 divided by 3 is just 1. Okay, so what we have left here is 2p minus 3q plus 1, so the same is over here, so I take that out. So I have 2p minus 3q plus 1, and then I'm left with x squared. So this, for the first term, I'm left with my x squared, and for the second term, I'm left with negative 3. And there is our answer. And that was grouping, and then we are done.